Hi everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Allplane Podcast where we talk with the movers and shakers redefining the future of commercial aviation. Before we dive into today's conversation, I would like to remind you that all previous episodes of this podcast, along with many other interesting stories about innovation and sustainability in aviation, are available on the Allplane website at Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv. And I would also like to invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, which focuses on sustainability in the aviation industry. You can find the subscription link right on our website. And now it's time for today's episode. Today we're going to talk about supply chains, and in particular about supply chains for the advanced air mobility industry. I am sure that many of you have read about the plans that quite a few eVTOL and advanced air mobility developers have laid out to produce thousands of aircraft between just a few years' time. But even if we assume that everything is okay from the point of view of certification and regulation and all of that, are those industrial plans realistic? Is it possible for an aerospace supply chain, which has been already struggling to cope with demand from the, let's say, traditional side of the industry, able to accommodate this projected demand? We're going to try to answer these questions with our guest today. Stefan Schamberger is an expert in advanced air mobility supply chains and particularly aerostructures, because Stefan has worked many years with Tier 1 suppliers such as FACC of Austria and more recently Sonaca, another major aerospace supplier from Belgium. And he also runs an industry consulting practice called Nova Elevation, in the website of which he publishes regularly industry analysis about the state of the industry and its supply chains. With Stefan, we talk also about what it takes to build an eVTOL fuselage and which technologies are being used to accelerate the manufacture of composite aerostructures, but also about another interesting aspect of the eVTOL era. How do engineering talent and technologies flow between traditional aerospace design and manufacturing and the new generation of electric and hybrid aircraft? So don't miss today's episode if you wish to learn more about the industrial aspects of the advanced air mobility revolution. And now, without further ado, let me welcome Stefan to the podcast. Hello, Stefan. How are you?
Hey, Miguel. I'm doing fine. How about you?
Very good. Yeah. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, in the U.S.
Okay, interesting. You've been based in the US for quite a while, I think, working on projects in the aerospace industry, but you're originally from Austria, is that right?
Exactly, yes. I grew up in Austria, and I think we met the last time, was it in 24, end of 24?
Ooh, hard to tell. I remember you were working for FACC, which is a very important Austrian company that supplies the aerospace industry. But yeah, you were already based in the US at the time, I think, representing them over there. But then, since then, I think you've got a few professional changes, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. When we met, I was based in Seattle, Washington, working for FACC, as you mentioned, and primarily focused on developing their advanced air mobility strategy since I moved in 2021. So that was my primary objective, besides a couple of other assignments, like, well, obviously working with Boeing and developing that relationship. But a key focus was on how FACC could benefit from advanced air mobility.
Yeah, actually, I remember that was for an article that I published on Aerotime, which was about the aerostructures for the advanced air mobility sector. So basically, most of these companies that are developing eVTOLs have Tier 1 suppliers that are making the actual fuselages of their eVTOLs for them. And I think, FACC was one of the players in this field. But it's not the only one. There are a few others also doing this type of work. And this is basically your field of work, right? Aerostructures. That's been the core of your professional activity.
Yes, I've been an aerostructures guy ever since. I'm in the industry now for a little bit more than 20 years. Did some work in cabin interiors, as that was also part of the FACC business, or is still part of their business. At the time, 1.5 years ago, I moved over to Sonaca Group. I joined them as a vice president for business development and marketing. Sonaca, as you know, is primarily more a metallics supplier. They have developed some exposure to advanced air mobility as well. especially if you talk about SQRTM, where they have developed some composite work. However, we just recently acquired Aciturri, a Spanish composite company, and I knew them very well because at the end of the day, in composites, there's only a handful, I would say, competitors that you really have, and well, we all know them. We can name them. It's GKN, who is the biggest. Then you have Aernova, FSCC, Aciturri. So that I would say those are the prime competitors, and then you have you could also talk about Kai and then Tai, but those what I call primarily the players that we
And composites are the name of the game, right? When it comes to advanced air mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we all know that batteries are not there where they are supposed to be to really get this industry off the ground. So they need to squeeze every gram that they can find out of their structures. And then obviously composites is the best fit for doing that.
You also have been advising companies in this field through an initiative, a project. It's called Nova Elevation, right? What can you tell us about this? I read quite a few of your articles on LinkedIn commenting on industry developments. So you got a pretty good vantage point of what's going on in advanced air mobility. And that's actually one of the things I would like to discuss here today, because I think you floated some very interesting ideas about where this industry is going. Can you tell us more about this Nova, the work you do through Nova Elevation as well?
Sure. A couple of years ago, I founded Nova Elevation because they had more and more tier 1, tier 2, and also tier 3 suppliers reaching out as I built some reputation in the industry. If I could give them some advice, how they could find footage in the industry and also how they could benefit. Because at the end of the day, I think for the tier 1s and also the tier 2s, for the supply chain in general, the advanced air mobility gives you a playing field to develop technology. And that was part of my somehow provocative article saying the end game is not advanced air mobility. At least for the suppliers, it never has been. The end game is really to prepare for what's next in the industry, which is everybody is waiting for the next generation single aisle. And a lot of these technologies that we currently develop in advanced air mobility, or at least where the development proceeds, because if we talk about composite aerostructures, those developments have not started in advanced air mobility, like thermoplastics or in general out of autoclave technologies. There was a while ago, right? I think it started in 2010 to 12. No, a little later. I think it was like mid of the decade where Airbus launched the Wing of Tomorrow, the Empennage of Tomorrow. Like these programs, they really started all these initiatives, and then advanced air mobility is just taking it and advancing it further. Back into 21 with all these spec pitches for the investors, where the advanced air mobility players projected rates from, I don't know, I think we've seen 250 in 25 going up to 1,000, 2,000 before end of this decade. I mean, if that would have materialized, the whole industry would have been challenged to further accelerate implementing these technologies, because if you have two handful of players forecasting 1,000, 2,000 vehicles a year, then there is a demand which is unprecedented for the industry.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, the aerospace industry, the mainstream industry, the traditional OEMs, to put it this way, have already been facing quite a few supply chain constraints, right? So they are kind of struggling now to fulfill the order backlog they have now. So that would put a lot more strain, I guess, on that supply chain if these advanced air mobility companies were, as you said, being able to fulfill also their designs for the second half of this decade. It seems now we are moving more towards end of decade scenario, right? I mean, some of them are saying between 2026 and 2028 for certification, but we'll see. I mean, we are looking, I guess, potentially more at if everything goes according to how it should go, we're looking more at 2030, I guess, for this to become more of a more generalized production at the scale.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think the visionary concept of the Jetsons or the Uber type of applications where we use advanced air mobility to go from A to B within cities, at least is postponed for quite a little bit. I think right now we're looking more at first applications in the way of what Joby just demonstrated in New York City, from a city center vertiport to an airport. I think that's something which could be very easily implemented. And it was actually a very important demonstration for the industry, because for the first time, it was not like a staged test flight in the desert. It was really a flight in an existing airspace, demonstrating how the future could look like for advanced air mobility.
And then we also have the cargo segment. And we have seen in China, for example, Autoflight. It's been conducting some real flights carrying stuff around, even offshore, in mountain areas, in different locations. So that sounds also something that could happen relatively early as well, because after all, I mean, we already have some delivery drones, right, operating. So that would be a bit of a next stage of that.
Yeah, there's a couple of these applications. You have a good point with cargo. I think Beta Technologies has also pivoted into doing cargo as a first application before transporting passengers. But then you also have military applications.
True.
I would assume it's much more easier to certify these vehicles for the military use case. And all of the primes have pivoted into that direction. Joby, Archer, Beta, all of them have contracts with Archer, for example, is working with Underhill. So, and all of them get funding and support from the defense sector in the US.
So how prepared is the supply chain for this, let's say, change of paradigm? The tier one suppliers, I mean, some of those that you have mentioned have already been working with eVTOLs very closely, like GKN, for example, or Aciturri. How prepared are they at not just at the research level, which I'm sure they are very much involved, but in the sense of being able to scale up the production facilities quickly?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what type of scale we're talking about. Because right now, despite all the OEMs talking about autoclave technologies to support the scale, at this point, it's primarily very conventional manual hand layup. Some of them use AFP, like Joby does in their marina side, but it's very conventional process. Hand layup, some sort of automation with ATL, AFP, but then autoclave cure. And that would be the huge bottleneck, because you face cycle times of 6 to 10, 12 hours, depending on the cycle, with the heat up ramps and the cool down ramps. So that would be the real bottleneck for, if we talk about, let's say, automotive type of scale, which based on the applications I've been discussing now, I don't see that that's really happening, because it's still somewhat of a niche application rather than scaling up to 2,000, 3,000 vehicles per year.
Because one of the things that the eVTOL industry is selling is actually that they are doing new stuff, the batteries, some things like tilt rotors, of course the business model as well. But what about the actual structures? Is there anything relatively revolutionary in the way these structures, the fuselage, the airframes are built, or is it just a derivative of, let's say, a more traditional aircraft making?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because at this point, with at the end, we only have produced a couple of flight test vehicles. There is not more. They are working on these design changes to be more suitable for rate production. But right now, it's, as with the manufacturing concept, also the design concept is very, very much conventional.
And is there any bottleneck further upstream? Because if, let's say this Taiwan, I mean, let's say that the eVTOL thing is happening, all these projections materialize, and you have the need to produce thousands of them. All these tier one suppliers that need to produce these airframes, I guess they also have their own supply chains of, for example, the autoclave to make these airframes, the composites. Could there potentially, like the bottleneck could potentially move further upstream in that regard, or there isn't that much of a concern here? I don't know. I'm not familiar with how specialized is the supply chain when it comes to building all the machinery, all the equipment you need to keep this running.
Yeah, well, if we stay focused on aerostructures, I think, yes, there will be a huge clash because you just mentioned it before. All these suppliers who support the OEMs with primary structures like FSSC, Aciturri, Leonardo, GKN, name them, they are also involved in the ramp-ups of the A320, 737 MAX, also the wide-body programs. And then essentially at some point pivoting and preparing themselves for the next generation singulates, which are supposed to have wide body type of composite content, which means 50% plus, and are supposed to have rates higher than 100. And then obviously, if you would imagine at the same time, eVTOL industry takes off. And if that clashes with next generation singlet, all the ramp ups that we are currently seeing, there will be a bottleneck. And it could even, it's even probably much earlier in the supply chain with the raw material suppliers. I don't believe they would be prepared to support both industries taking off at the same time.
Yeah, actually, the raw material is also an interesting topic because we have seen tensions in the, for example, titanium market or the famous rare earths. But I'm not too familiar with what's the supply chain of composites when it comes to the chemicals used to make them. I don't know if is there any bottleneck there or at the moment, any scarcity or not at all.
Well, I would be more concerned about the production capacity and capabilities of the raw material suppliers, because there's not even a handful who are really playing that field, right?
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned though in your articles is there's a line that caught my attention, is that it's the next single aisle family of aircraft that will reshape advanced air mobility and not the other way around. So that an interesting point here is that basically because let's put it this way, because the large OEMs, Boeing and Airbus namely, have been basically producing iterations of the same type of aircraft for so long, many of the, let's say, innovation focused, well, I mean, there are innovations in those programs as well, but let's put it this way, the people that are looking for more revolutionary type of innovation have moved onto the advanced air mobility, and that has been acting as a sort of a test bank for ideas and new concepts, and also a repository of talent, basically keeping all these minds busy doing stuff. And those people eventually could also, there can be an overflow from one side of the industry to the other. So can you tell us a bit more about this concept, how you see this happening? We know Boeing and Airbus now are discussing about this, what comes next after the 737, the A320. This is still a few years into the future, but of course those programs take many, many years. So what's the general landscape here? How we make sense of all this?
Yeah, I mean, you have a good point with all the engineering talent and how it flows or how it flew into advanced air mobility, because that's really for them, it's a playing field. And that's also, I think, where tier one suppliers took a lot of benefit out of the industry, because you could really keep your engineering talent, first of all, employed, because if there is no development program, what are you going to do with all these engineers? So you could keep them. And you brought them up to the latest technology development. So in preparation of the next generation singlet, you have a very, I would say, educated and up to the latest technology engineering expertise within your company, which potentially you would have lost if we wouldn't have seen the rise of advanced air mobility. So, and if I take it from an OEM perspective, and if you just spend some time at like the Archer, Joby's, Peters, and name them, there's a lot of people who have heritage in Boeing, Airbus, Spirit, Triumph. Like a lot of these people went to advanced air mobility because that was the next big thing. First of all, the salaries were good because we have seen a lot of startups in the Silicon Valley area, like Archer. Pay was very good, very attractive. Also probably incentivized with stock options, stock programs. So a lot of people moved to these companies. But then the question is, what's next? Like, because at the end of the day, I think what everybody in the industry is waiting for is the next generation singlet. So I would assume a lot of the talent will flow and move back to the big OEMs. That's a little bit the constraint that we might see in advanced air mobility. I would say the pure players like Archer, Beta, and Joby, they probably have a better chance of succeeding than those backed by OEMs. Because at the end of the day, let's take Eve, Embraer. I think if Embraer launches a next platform, I'm not sure if they really want to go into NGSA, like in the single aisle field, if they would run both or could sustain both programs at the same time.
Yeah, although Eve is also is a publicly listed independent company in theory, so you could play a little bit with the stock option thing to retain talent. Maybe I'm not sure what are the arrangements they have, but yeah, a good point. You think this new single aisle is going to happen in the, let's say, next 10 years, so towards middle of next decade, maybe?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely going to happen. The question really is when. And yeah, I think the OEMs are in a difficult situation because I would say they want to launch, but on the other hand, first they want to ramp up, especially in the case of Boeing. They need to come to reach positive cash flow again. I think forecasting between 1 to 3 billion this year. But then they need a couple of years with positive cash flow to manage the debt situation and then also have enough cash ready to develop a new plane, because there's estimates it could cost between, 20 to 30 billion. So it's obviously a huge investment. But yeah, I definitely think it's going to happen. The question really is when. Well, at this point, I think the most realistic assumption is a launch somewhere at the end of this decade, and then maybe enter into service mid towards end of next decade.
And then what happens then with all this talent that it's, you mentioned, like flowing back to the mainstream. So can we assume then that the advanced air mobility by that time will already be kind of relatively mature? They can just keep going, consolidating what they have, rather than making these very exponential leaps that they are forced to do now because they are inventing a new category.
No, exactly. And maybe sounds odd, but a delay in the next generation single development could actually be very helpful for advanced air mobility. Because as you just said, maybe if it takes another 5 years until this potential flow of talent back to the aerospace OEMs happens, that could create the window that the advanced air mobility players need to finalize the engineering of their airplanes. Let's be honest, not everybody will flow back to the traditional OEMs. So, but we are talking about the majority probably. So if they get a window that extends for another couple of years, that probably could be very helpful for advanced air mobility.
Yeah, but are we not forgetting also there are other segments of aerospace that might become, they're already becoming the next big thing in a way. Like I'm thinking here about space, or space in a broad sense, including everything suborbital, reusable rockets. Some of them kind of very exotic compared to the more down-to-earth aviation, but some of these applications are also quite tangential to what we commonly call like commercial aviation or civilian aviation. So that's another vector as well. I mean, I'm not sure up to what point there's always going to be a new exciting field where it's going to attract all these more adventurous profiles. And the capital as well that comes with it. In a way, that could possibly have an effect, I guess, in the calculations that these companies have to do when planning ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I told you that one of the main reasons why I moved to the US was advanced air mobility, another reason was space. Because it always depends where you look at in space. But for example, if you look at the launchers, their composite structures, at the end of the day, that's very similar to what we do in aerospace. Like just take these big payload fairings. It's a structure you could do in aerospace as well. So some of these components, if you label them space, at the end of the day, in terms of from a manufacturing perspective, it doesn't really matter for you on the manufacturing side if it goes on an airplane or if it goes on a rocket.
Yeah. So what do you think is the next big thing when it comes to aerostructures? The last, let's say, couple of decades were a lot about this composites, but is this already, let's say, a mature technology, or are we going to see more new things happening in this space in the years to come?
Well, I mean, there could always be something new popping up. But I think from what we know now, the overall team will be out of autoclave manufacturing because you want to avoid the bottleneck of autoclaves. Investing in multiple millions of dollars into buying additional autoclave capacity.
To grow by volume or to make the current processes faster so that you don't need to bake these composites for so long?
Yeah, it's actually both, right? If you look at out of autoclave, it's just an overall team. Yeah, it includes RTM, resin transfer molding. It includes infusion technology, thermoplastics, which is a big thing. I mean, thermoplastics is around for 40 years, 50 years, but it never really took off and scaled. But now with sustainability becoming more important, and also sometimes labor constraints, because with thermoplastics, if it's applied the right way, you can remove a lot of the assembly hours because you don't need to fasten, you can do welding. So these type of technologies, and then also further automation, automated fiber placement, robotic ways of laying up the plies, because composite is basically you lay up ply after ply after ply in a manual manner, and using AFP, ATL, also robotic on the machining, on the drilling, on the non-destructive inspection side. So I think there's still a lot that we can do with this, I would say, fairly new technologies, because the existing platforms don't see too much of it yet.
Just for the people that might not be very familiar with these processes, can you explain briefly in a few words the main steps for, let's say, a more traditional composite making process and the thermoplastics that you were mentioning? What steps and what type of time investment does each of them involve?
Yeah, traditional thermoset composite manufacturing includes pre-impregnated plies, like carbon fiber or glass fiber, pre-impregnated with resin. And then you lay up ply after ply after ply to come up with your ply sequence and the stacking. And then you take those, compact them under a vacuum bag, and then pull them and put them into autoclaves, which are basically pressurized, huge pressurized ovens. And then cure the parts in there for, depends on the cycle, but could be up to 10 to 12 hours. And that's obviously is a huge time constraint.
Yes.
Then there's ways to avoid that autoclave, where you use tri-fiber, like what we call resin transfer molding. You apply tri-fiber, but still it's a manual process to apply and put the tri-fiber in place. And then you inject in pressurized presses, you inject resin. That's the second way, but that's already out of autoclave, because these press cycles can be much shorter than the autoclave cycle, but still leaves you with the need of a manual labor in laying up the plies. Another iteration, a step up in automating these processes, is automated fiber placement or automated tape laying, where basically a robot replaces the human in laying up the plies. From what we have seen so far in the technology, it's not really much faster, but it's obviously more repetitive and less errors, and you can reduce the labor that you need in the clean rooms to lay up those plies. Look at thermoplastics, you basically have one big benefit, you have a couple of big benefits. One is it's recyclable, because it's more a thermoplastic material, which you can bring back into its original form. But then usually the way with thermoplastics, you buy already the compacted sheets, and then you perform bring it into shape on your side, on the manufacturing side. So it's already faster. Also, thermoplastics can be welded, which potentially could remove then all the fastening in the assembly area.
Okay, interesting. Just to wrap it up, because we are kind of running out of time, but I just would like to ask you more generally, what's your take on the future of advanced air mobility? Here on this podcast, we've got some of the entrepreneurs in this field that have obviously presented a nice, bright future for advanced air mobility. Then we also had some other guests that were a bit more skeptical and were kind of pointing out some inconsistencies in this type of speech and in the numbers that are usually being presented. What's your view? Do you think we're going to have all these eVTOLs flying around soon, or maybe yes, but not as many as some people predict? I'm interested.
Yeah, I would be very realistic about it. I think for quite some time, it's going to be a niche, not a paradigm. It's going to be what we discussed already, some type of helicopter replacement to going from downtown to the airports and vice versa. It's going to be cargo transportation. Medevac could be also an interesting field. And then I would have big hopes on military applications to further drive and develop the technology. Because for the passenger transportation application, you still have a couple of unsolved problems. Vertiports. Where's the infrastructure? There was, at the very beginning, there was like the idea of putting vertiports on top of high-rise buildings. I think that's not gonna work because you need the infrastructure to recharge, and then also it's about who gets access to these buildings. And so that whole infrastructure of vertiports is unsolved. Also airspace, like imagine you have in big cities hundreds of these eVTOLs flying around. There will be probably a solution, and technology, AI, that's something which can be really accelerate these things. But still, at this point, it's unsolved. And then we also need to certify the vehicles. I think that's progressing, maybe not as fast as we wanted to, or as fast as the OEMs imagined, but there is progress. There's also, I think, a very strong support now by the governments, also especially here in the US. And then China, Middle East, there's even I would say they're even faster in implementing those applications. And then I think a final one will be public acceptance. If public really wants to fly in these vehicles, obviously they're going to be the first movers, but then does it attract the mass? So that's a couple of things we need to, we have to see how that's going to evolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exciting times ahead. For people that wish to learn more about your work and about your opinion pieces, what would be the best ways to check it out? Obviously, you publish on LinkedIn. I don't know if there's any other resources you could recommend.
Yeah, well, there's my website, nova-elevation.com. And, you can reach me on LinkedIn. You maybe can post the link in this podcast. And then, I'm happy to engage in.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Stefan, for your time today, for giving us the view as well from the supply chain side, which is a part of the industry that is often neglected. We get all this talk about the demand side, but obviously someone's going to build these airframes, and that's not easier. It's easier said than done. So thank you so much again, Stefan, for your time today.
You're welcome. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. If you like this podcast, you can support us by giving it a great rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you get it from. And remember, you can, of course, subscribe to it. And you can also get regular updates through the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. We have a newsletter where we cover the aviation industry every week with a special focus on innovation and sustainability. So give it a go. Thank you and goodbye.